right, folks, we are back. We are hopeful that we've fixed the problem. So we're going to ask our audience watching at home if they hear. I notice a little bit of an echo on my end. I apologize for that. Kate, would you mind? Can you give us a sound check from where you are?
Okay, check, 1, 2.
And folks, we know there's a little bit of a delay on our end as we're about 30 seconds ahead of you, so we are waiting for some feedback to make sure that we can hear. We're going to check to make sure everything is working. While we're doing that, though, I do just want to say hello. Ben Spagan from the Jefferson Educational Society here. For those, sound check, she's muted.
You can hear me?
I can hear you fine, Kate. I've got you. So it's just a conversation between the two of us, and then I'll relay everything to the audience afterwards. I'm kidding. Okay, they can hear you now. So Kate, we've figured it out. Again, folks, thank you so much for joining us as we navigate these new digital waters as we continue to want to bring you programming from the Jefferson Educational Society. Certainly they are not without their complications. I promise you, we did do a trial run about an hour before this, and everything worked perfectly then, as it often does. And when we go live, we run into those hiccups, but thank you all for bearing with us and for joining us. We're so glad to have you and sticking around for this program, COVID-19 and food security. With us is Miss Caitlin Welsh. She is an Erie native and the director of Global Food Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Washington, D.C. She's going to give us a tour of the horizon. Of food security issues during the COVID-19 pandemic, from global agricultural trade to protecting the vulnerable in our communities, best practices for shopping at your very own grocery store, what to look out for. As I mentioned, she's no stranger to the Jefferson. Caitlin Welsh was a presenter at the Jefferson's Global Summit 9 speaker series, where she gave a lecture, Feeding the World in the 21st Century. But of course, as I mentioned before, she is the director of the Global Food Security Program at CSIS, where she provides insight and policy solutions for global food security challenges. She brings with her a decade of U.S. government experience to that role. Prior, she had served at the National Security Council and the National Economic Council as the Director of Global Economic Engagement, and she coordinated U.S. policy in the G7 and G20 across multiple summits. And then prior to that, she was part of the Department of State's Office of Global Food Security, including serving as an acting director. She has a host of other accomplishments, including serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco's breadbasket region. We'll hear a little bit about that. She'll give you some more on her background, but her bachelor's degree is from the University of Virginia. Her master's is from Columbia University's School of International Public Affairs. And of course, most proudly, as we say here, she hails from Erie, Pennsylvania. She also speaks Arabic and French. Plenty of other things we'll learn along the way. Caitlin, welcome back to the Jefferson stage, and thank you for joining us, folks, digitally. We're so glad to have everybody tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you, Kate. So if you could, maybe a great place to start would be some of your background, unpack that for us. You're the expert in this field, but also, I think for folks tuning in, give us a good reminder of just what food security is, that definition, and what that means for us.
Sure. Food security, an individual is considered food secure when the individual is able to meet their nutritional needs to live an active and healthy lifestyle. So that's just a general definition we can use for everyday purposes. When it comes to the UN, the specific definition has to do with the availability of food, access to food, so people's physical and economic access to food, the nutritional value of that food, and the stability of those things over time. So that's the technical definition of it. A lot of people will distill food security into things like just agricultural production, but again, that's only one facet of it. And so when I talk tonight, I'll talk about ag production, but some other things as well in addition to that. I think of food security as the broad umbrella under which many other things fall.
And so, Kate, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in this topic, because you are one of the nation's leading experts in this. So what brought you to the topic of food security, and why have you continued the path from working at the State Department to working in the White House to now CSIS?
Sure. I actually happened into the technical issue. I was a presidential management fellow after graduating from graduate school, and I went on what I thought was going to be a short-term assignment to the State Department, to the Office of Global Food Security, which had just been established there. Found the issue fascinating and really liked the office, so I stayed there for over 7 years and ended up as the acting director of the office. When I left there, I left there on a detail assignment from the State Department to the White House in late 2018, and I really took a break from food security. I covered everything else. I was the director for all things G7 and G20, so everything from marine plastic litter to global steel excess capacity to terrorist use of the internet, and didn't necessarily expect to come back to the issue, but when I learned that CSIS was recruiting, I jumped at the chance because I really respect CSIS as an organization. When it comes to the issue of global food security, the issue is constantly fascinating. It's always a challenge in different parts of the world for different reasons. It's always current, so it's an issue that I just never get bored with it.
Great. So give us a little bit of insight into this crisis and what we're talking about. Really dive in for a bit, and I'll let you go here for a while, Kate, and I'll jump in with questions, but we're going to be taking some from the audience as well. If anybody has any questions, just leave them in the comment section below. We're going to get them fed over to me, and I'll ask those to Kate. So Kate, walk us through what's going on right now and how food security is such an important issue for us amidst the time of COVID-19.
Great. Happy to do this. Just for a little bit more background, my first day on the job at my new job at the Center for Strategic and International Studies was March 16th, so I'm just about 2.5 weeks into the job. My first day on the job was first day of mandatory telework for that organization, and I really did not anticipate that so much of our work was going to be focusing on domestic issues right now, but because of the pandemic, you see food insecurity as a challenge that we're facing as a country. So we're, as a program, we're looking a lot at the United States and obviously at the rest of the world. But I'll start the talk with food security in the United States. And the message that I want to start with is what we're hearing from industry, which is that food agricultural supply chains in the United States remain strong. I think it's really important for everyone to know, especially when they go to grocery stores. When you see grocery shelves that are empty, it's not because supplies are low, it's because demand is high. Makes sense. It's understandable. The demand spikes when people receive shelter-in-place orders. But again, industry and everyone is asking customers not to panic, but rather to realize that our supply chains in our country remain strong. One thing that's interesting is that there are different impacts depending on which supply chains we're talking about. When it comes to grains, if you think about it, they're harvested with relatively little labor. If you think of how much area one tractor can cover, and their whole supply chains from harvesting, storing, packing, shipping, marketing, etc. All of that can happen with relatively little person-to-person contact. So the grain supply chains are pretty stable right now. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, though, in comparison, their harvests are relatively labor-intensive, and vegetables and fruits themselves are perishable. So in this case, loss of labor could affect these supply chains. For the United States, the State Department has extended visas for seasonal agricultural workers to ward off a decrease in labor that could affect the availability of fruits and vegetables in our own stores. You've heard the Department of Homeland Security's acting secretary say that we want to make sure that cargo continues, trade continues, and healthcare workers continue to be able to work to cross our borders. We're watching what's happening with labor movement in and out of the United States and around the world as it affects vegetable and fruit value chains. And then when it comes to meat and poultry, one thing that I was pleasantly surprised to hear is that those industries are very healthy right now. Over the past 4 weeks, the combined production of beef, pork, chicken, and turkey was up 8.5% compared to this time last year. The strong retail demand has incentivized processors and packers to ramp up production in the last couple of weeks. And a center that studies livestock in the United States said that clearly there's no shortage of protein in the pipeline, but there are spot shortages in some products in some parts of the country where the normal supply pipeline could not catch up with panic buying. So again, strong supply chains. When there's panic buying, supplies run short, but overall the supply chain is very healthy. A few other recent stats about agricultural production in our own country right now. Farm Journal did a survey, and they found that 90% of farmers and ranchers said that they expect COVID-19 to impact their business. Farmers and ranchers say that they're worried about the uncertainty of commodity markets, the financial outlook of their business, and the health of their families and their labor force. Good news, though, is that to date, the S&P's Ag Commodity Index is more stable than other industries, with agribusiness tracking toward the median. And recent federal stimulus packages provide relief for the ag sector. The most substantial allotment for agriculture recently is $14 billion to be channeled through the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation. So it's good to see good attention to this sector domestically. I'll turn right now to some international issues, especially one thing that's been in headlines over the past week or so, and that's export restrictions being applied by certain countries that produce large amounts of agricultural products. As of today, and this number grows every day, but as of today, countries of Armenia, Belarus, Cambodia, Egypt, Honduras, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Serbia, Thailand, and Vietnam are restricting exports of a variety of foods, from rice and beans to rye, sugar, molasses, eggs, vegetable oils, many other things. And what this does is this reminds people of the last time the world experienced a food price crisis, which was about 12 years ago in 2007 and 2008. So in that time period, in a relatively short period of time, the price of some staple goods spiked. And as a result, the number of food insecure people around the world approached 1 billion for the first time in history. At that time, some major exporting countries taxed exports or banned them altogether. And this reduced the supply of a lot of agricultural products on the global market and pushed prices up. This behavior was ill-advised then, and it still is today. So today you're seeing calls against export restrictions by countries. The Director General of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization said that we have to ensure that food value chains are not disrupted and continue to function well and promote the production and availability of diversified, safe, and nutritious food for all. So I think that we could see some increases of food prices because of export bans worldwide. But it's important to remember that when that happened 12 years ago, and when it had very extreme consequences 12 years ago, there are many other factors at play then. So back in 2007, 2008, there had been a decline in agriculture production worldwide for about 2 decades up to that point. That's not the case right now. Back about 12 years ago, it was a low point in the global stocks reserves of grain. Not the case right now. Back then, energy costs were increasing and not decreasing. When energy costs are increasing, there's a high correlation between the price of energy and the price of food. Right now, we're not seeing that. Other things were taking place back then. Demand from emerging economies was just coming online, so the global markets were just getting used to increasing purchasing power by countries like China, India, Brazil, etc. Other things happening then, speculation in financial markets, increased demand for biofuels, etc. So all those things happen at the same time to create a perfect storm, leading to the global food price crisis in 2007, 2008. Again, just because we're seeing export restrictions right now doesn't mean we have the same recipe at play. I think that export restrictions right now are worrisome, and we could see some impact on food prices around the world because of that. But I don't see right now, at least today, the potential for a major global food price crisis like we saw 12 years ago. I should add the caveat, though, that this could change if more countries apply export restrictions, particularly countries that produce large proportions of global food stocks. CSIS and my program, we're monitoring this very closely, and we actually plan to host an online event on this topic in about 2 weeks. That'll be open to the public for anyone who's interested in participating. Now I want to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on food security in developing countries. I want to start out by saying it's not inevitable that coronavirus will have a worse impact in the developing world, and there are some factors that could mitigate the impact of it. So, for example, across Africa and South Asia, the average age of the population is 20, according to the UN. And as everyone knows, there's a higher survival rate of COVID-19 among younger populations. That works in their favor. However, there are a lot of things that are worrisome. Some statistics that shocked me. For example, across Africa alone, almost 600 million people live in informal settlements or slums. There, you can't practice social distancing, and also they have very limited access to clean water, if they have access at all, for things like hand washing. Across the whole continent of Africa, there is an average of 2 doctors per 10,000 people in cities, according to the World Health Organization. In Italy, by comparison, there's an average of 41 doctors per 10,000 people in cities. And then the availability of equipment is it's shockingly low. When it comes to isolation beds in hospitals, the entire country of South Sudan has 24. The entire country of Malawi has 25 isolation beds. The entire country of Zimbabwe has no isolation beds. And for ventilators, the entire country of Central African Republic has 3 ventilators for the entire country. So for me, I think that the major risk right now to food security in developing countries is loss of income from job loss. When people lose their jobs and lose their incomes, they can't purchase food for themselves and for their families. The International Food Policy Research Institute estimates for every global economic slowdown of 1 percentage point, the number of people living in poverty and food insecurity would increase by 2%, or about 14 million around the world. The impacts of COVID-19 and from economic slowdown caused by COVID-19 is going to vary region by region. I'm familiar with the impacts of Ebola in West Africa. I was in Liberia right around the time that Ebola broke out then. And what we saw was that there was a reduced production of agricultural goods when the labor force fell ill. So there are less agricultural goods available. There's reduction in regional trade because of that, spikes in prices of some staple foods, and then just simply the reduction in availability of nutritious food that keeps populations healthy in the first place. So we're going to have different impacts on different parts of different regions of the world. When they are very harsh, it's going to be bad for the U.S. economy because we'll experience disruptions in our own supply chains for products, and we'll lose markets for the goods that we produce. So I want to go from food insecurity in developing countries because of COVID-19 to food insecurity in our own country right now, and then talk about what we can do as individuals. Everyone knows that unemployment right now is at a historic high, and it shocked me just beyond belief this morning, the headline saying that the unemployment that we're seeing is without precedent in our country. Food insecurity is rising and it's going to continue to rise. I spoke with a reporter from The Guardian who had done a survey of food banks across our country and was hearing, generally speaking, that across our country, across the food banks that she spoke with, about a third of people who are using food banks have never used them before. There was an operator of a food bank in the Pittsburgh region who said that food insecurity levels are worse now than during the steel mill layoffs in the 1980s. There was an operator of a food bank in Massachusetts who saw an 850% increase in customers compared to last March. So food banks are suffering right now because of an increase in customers and also a decrease in stocks because people aren't able to host food drives to donate food, and also because there are fewer donations from stores because of panic buying. Store shelves are empty, so stores have less food to donate to food banks. So the advice that we are giving to individuals, and I'm very pleased to hear this echoed by many different outlets, is to shop responsibly. And when at the grocery store, take what you need and take only what you need. Shop for 1 week or maximum of 2 weeks and leave enough on the shelves for other people. Especially keep in mind people who are purchasing goods through WIC and SNAP benefits. And if you have a choice, if you're not using WIC or SNAP benefits, if you have a choice between a food that's approved for purchase through WIC and SNAP or that's not, leave the WIC and SNAP eligible items on the shelf for people who are shopping with those through those benefits. And last piece of advice is donate to local food banks when you can. And food banks are often asking for donations of dollars and not food. So that's just a big overview of all the issues we're covering right now, and happy to go into detail where people would like.
So, Kate, I really appreciate that. Thank you for going through that. So much to unpack. I want to start back at the beginning, though. If I heard correctly, you just started this job and you've been telecommuting, so you haven't been to the office yet. What kind of adaptation has that been for you in terms of starting this job right in the thick of it, the eye of the storm, so to speak?
Yeah, it's funny. I have been to my office. I met my staff in person, but our entire formation as a team has happened online. But I actually think it works in my benefit because I didn't have to get used to working in person to working online. It's just like I jumped in and this is how it's done. And I also think for me, there's actually an increase in attention to the issue that I'm covering. So it's good for the sake of the program.
And so one of the things you mentioned at the end there was, needing to support food banks and the fact that some are up eightfold in terms of the attention that they're receiving now. You mentioned in particular giving donations, and they're seeking dollars, not food. And I think we tend to think, we have something in our cabinets, we want to put it in a bag and we want to drop it off. Reaffirm that of why dollars are more important than food at this point for a food bank.
Yeah, donations they'd require movement of people and perhaps face-to-face interaction when people drop off food at food banks, and also. As most people know, I hope they know, that the coronavirus itself can last on surfaces for up to 72 hours. So there's also a fear of a risk of transmission from actual food items. I think that food banks are feeling comfortable purchasing from wholesalers. They also can get food at much cheaper prices, and the dollars can go a lot farther than food donations.
So you mentioned the fact that we're now finding that the virus can live on surfaces for at least 72 hours. Talk to us about some of the guidance that you're finding, safe ways for us to shop at our grocery stores right now. And I think when I enter the grocery store, what should I be doing as I walk through the aisles? What should I be doing as I interact with people working there? What should I be doing? And then when I get home, what should I be doing about the food? Should I be washing everything that comes into my, apartment or house or wherever it is that I am? So can you walk us step by step of getting to the grocery store, hitting the door, what we do while we're in there, and then what we do when we get home?
Yeah, absolutely. Guidance is to distance yourself from other shoppers. So keep that 6 feet away from other shoppers where you can do that. Also, when it comes to products, I personally think that it's a good idea not to pick up and put down a number of items on shelves. Like really go for what it is that you're looking for and take that. I'll skip ahead to when you get home. When you're bringing food into your home, treat that as an item that many people could have touched because that's reality. And it's not a bad idea. I don't see the CDC necessarily recommending this, but I think it's not a bad idea to simply wipe down packages that you bring into your house. So a bottle of olive oil, a package of potato chips, what have you. Wipe that down when you bring it home. And when it comes to preparing foods, of course, wash your hands before and after preparing foods. But back to the grocery store, I think it's also important to remember that not only your own safety when you're there, but the safety of grocery store workers, because you might be interacting with one person who's working there, but they're interacting with dozens, if not hundreds of people every day. And they have a higher risk of contamination because of those interactions. So just remember to keep a safe distance from people who are working there. When you're shopping.
And so when we're thinking about those foods, are there things, because I suppose for me, I think, I want to get foods that have a longer shelf life. But of course I don't want to avoid, produce and we still want to get fresh produce. So are there things we should be avoiding? Are there things that we should be perhaps purchasing more of or gravitating toward in the moment of a crisis like this?
Yeah. When the pandemic was new, I think there was a concern about buying food from places like China or Italy. We haven't seen guidance about avoiding such purchases. So again, it's just about being safe with the packaging of the food. And then when it comes to perishable items, my own advice is to purchase that when it's available. Great source of vitamins and minerals, but make sure you use it. Food loss and waste in our country is astronomically high, generally speaking. We as a country lose and waste tons and tons of food, literally, every year. This is not the time to do that, especially because shelves are running empty. So when you buy fresh fruits and vegetables, make sure you use them in your house. And then in terms of other foods to buy, just again, things that are shelf stable or things that last in your freezer. So I like, dried beans can go a long way, tomato paste, things like that, and frozen fruits and vegetables.
So I think you bring up an excellent point there, Caitlin, in the food waste issue that we have had as a country. And I think this is a really perhaps a defining moment for us in terms of how we interact with food. And so when we are making that trip to the grocery store, what are some things that we should be mindful in terms of purchasing, not overly buying in bulk and making sure that we're buying responsible? How can we begin to curb that food waste? And perhaps if there's a silver lining in all of this, maybe that's something we get better as a country moving forward out of this, where we waste less food because we purchase more smartly.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading something recently that said that a lot of our favorite foods today were created, became popular just as a way to use scraps of food, for example. So let me think, like certain soups and things like that. It's just like the things that would normally be tossed out, people decided to use them, and then they become part of our daily cuisine. I think that, a silver lining too is just that people might get more creative as home cooks, using everything that's in our pantries. So hoping that happens, and also that yes, people become more aware of food loss and waste around our country.
So you had mentioned some of your favorite things being, dried beans and tomato paste. I'll have to admit, one of the foods I got reacquainted with, in buying things that I know are going to stick around. Love the crackers, chicken and a biscuit. Do you have a favorite thing that, you might not have purchased before, but you thought, okay, if we are stocking up, I want to have something in my cupboard that I really enjoy. Can you let folks know what that might be?
Sure. Well, today we indulged in a specialty type of all-purpose flour from an Italian-based wheat. So I'm really looking forward to using that this weekend, and a nice olive oil, just because we could, and because other items were not available. But I'll answer that question actually with a recipe that I like. People are often finding that bread is unavailable, and I think one of the best recipes out there for any occasion is the New York Times no knead bread recipe, and it is the easiest bread to make, and it's fantastic, and I recommend that for everybody right now.
Awesome. We'll try to find that recipe and post it in the comment section below so that folks can check that out. One of the things that I think that maybe I don't always think of, if I have, let's take a can of chickpeas, for instance. I open them up, they go right into the pot. Should I be washing those, beforehand, rinsing them off, taking those extra measures? Again, just thinking about how we handle our food a little bit more differently now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what's inside the packaging I wouldn't necessarily worry about, but it's the packaging itself that I would. So chickpeas come in a hard metal container, so the virus, in theory, can last on that for hours, if not days. So that's what I would take care to rinse off or disinfect with wipes.
Question coming in from the audience for you, Caitlin. What is an organization with either national or global reach that I can donate to help mitigate COVID-related food shortages elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. In our own country, Feeding America is an umbrella organization for food pantries around our country. So that's one good place to look, Feeding America. And then the UN Food and Agriculture Organization is putting out an appeal to address food insecurity, not just because of the COVID crisis, but also there are other places of the world that are experiencing multiple crises at one time. I hadn't mentioned yet that parts of Africa and Asia are experiencing the worst locust swarms in 25 years, and those decimate agricultural crops. So they're dealing not only with reduced crop supply production, but also with COVID at the same time. So Food and Agriculture Organization or the World Food Program are other places to donate. And then especially, I also don't want to say that to overlook your needs in your own community. I think that it's really important to funnel funds to our own communities where we can.
So one of the things I think we think of with food too is that the economic impact that we're seeing on restaurants in particular. And here in Erie, a lot of restaurants are trying to do takeout or carry out only options. Can you give us some advice for how we're interacting with food being prepared by someone else that we're taking home and we want to consume?
Mm-hmm. To date, there have been no reported cases of contraction of COVID-19 through foodborne methods, foodborne means. So I think that there's little concern about actually getting it from the food that you're eating from somewhere. Again, not to drive this point on to start it. It's the packaging I would be concerned about. So make sure you wipe off the outside of the packaging, and then also consider not only your own health, but the health of the people that you're interacting with. So just be mindful of the distance you have with people who are in the restaurants when you pick it up. If you're having food delivered to your house, I think there's some smart tips out there. So for example, you could ask the delivery person to leave the food outside your door. If you want to leave a tip, you could also leave it in an envelope, for example, or to tip through the app. But just limit your interaction, your face-to-face interaction with people in the food services, because they're highly at risk right now. A sad story last week out of Italy about a grocer who died because of COVID. So we want to avoid that here in the U.S.
So back to the idea of the pantry, one of the questions that we've got coming in is, I keep hearing 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I've never prepared for 2 weeks. What does 2 weeks worth of food look like? What should I be thinking of when I go to the store? And I'm just going to add to this person's question because it's got me thinking now too. If I'm trying to limit my exposure, and you've done a great job helping us understand limiting the exposure to the workers who are on the front lines of this, trying to keep us all fed and keep us all food secure. If we're trying to limit that exposure, we're going to the grocery store once 2 weeks and trying our best to keep distance. What does 2 weeks worth of food look like?
I think the answer to that question is just good to keep in mind right now for your own budget, generally speaking, which is just write out a list of the meals that you might eat in 1 week or 2 weeks, and then what you would need to prepare those. And then that becomes your grocery shopping list. It's way too easy to get distracted if you don't have a list and just to buy things that you might not necessarily use or need. So I think that looks different from person to person, but a really good idea is just to sit down and think, okay, this is what I'm going to eat for breakfast for the week, for lunches, and for dinners. And where you don't have that food already in your pantry, supplement that with your next trip to the grocery store.
And so if we're thinking about interacting for 2 weeks, is there, I think when we go to those grocery stores, things that we are thinking about is what we can, eat in the now. And we're seeing, places like, here in Erie, Wegmans in particular is where I go. So I've seen them shut down their hot bar. Can we explain, why those aren't operational right now, why a deli counter might be closed, and just for those curious, why those have been something that grocery stores are cutting back?
I think that those would constitute high-touch surfaces where you're using the same handles to get food, for example, where people might be picking up the same, like dressings or something like that for the foods that they put together. I think that it's because of the social interaction that those require, that those are being shut down, not because COVID can be acquired through eating the food that's prepared there.
So one of the things that I can't help but think, and we've got a couple of different questions coming in around this, is are we going to run out? And I remember earlier in our discussion, you had shared an article about, reaffirming that even though shelves might be bare now, the supply chain, is in effect, they're not going to be bare for for much longer. But how at risk are we that some disruption in the supply chain may occur? We might have food shortages. That's one of the questions folks have for you.
Yeah, what we're hearing from industry is that we have multiple months of food available in our supply chains. I think that it differs, though, again, from food to food. The ones that are most vulnerable are, again, our fruits and vegetables, and specifically because of the amount of labor that they require for harvesting, et cetera. Imagine just the Erie area. Imagine if there was suddenly a restriction in labor, agricultural labor, to Erie County. During harvest season, who would be there to harvest their grapes, for example? And imagine that across every fruit and value chain across the country. That to me is a risk, and I think that's just simply an issue. I think that USDA and the State Department are cooperating very closely on that and understand that the availability of fruits and vegetables in our countries, it depends upon the availability of labor force from other countries. So I think that they're watching that closely, and then again, there's a risk of increase in the prices of some foods worldwide because of these export bans that are being applied. So to me, the two major risks are the availability of labor in our own country and the application of export restrictions by other countries. However, I'm not sensing panic by any industry people that I'm talking to. And really what it comes down to, and I'm so glad I'm hearing this in different outlets, is when you shop, what you do at the grocery store has a big effect on things.
One of the things you had mentioned earlier, and I think it's worth coming back to, is at the grocery store you had said noticing designation for WIC benefits or SNAP benefits, and if you're not using those benefits currently, working to choose something that's not labeled WIC or SNAP. Can you just recap that for us and the importance of doing that when we're talking about perhaps a more vulnerable population amidst this crisis?
Sure. So those foods will be labeled as such, and also we'll be updating our own website on the CSIS's Global Food Security page to list the foods that are WIC and SNAP eligible, so that those who are not shopping with those benefits can know to avoid those. But it's not only because people who are using those benefits can purchase those foods only, but also because because people who are using those benefits, they can only purchase foods at certain times of the week or the month when those benefits become available. Unlike other people in the country who are able to shop, weekly or monthly, every week or every 2 weeks. Some people might only be able to shop very sporadically, and we want to make sure that at whatever times those are, that food's going to be available for them to purchase.
And speaking about vulnerability, another question from the audience here is noting that the 16501 zip code in the heart of downtown Erie is the most impoverished zip code in the state of Pennsylvania. And so in looking at regions that are already stressed and are present with food deserts, a known reason for malnutrition, what are the best measures and incentives to ensure a continued supply of food, especially during COVID-19?
I wasn't aware of that about 16501. I think for me, what that comes down to is it's two things. It's the health of, unfortunately, of food banks. So I really, really think that you're going to see an increase in the number of people using food banks. People that are already using food banks will have less access to less food simply because new people are going to be coming to them. I also I wonder, and I want to be having I plan to have some conversations about this, if there will need to be specific legislation at this issue, at the issue of food security in our country, because the few ways that we've seen over the past few weeks, they've gone far, and I want to credit Congress and USDA for acting quickly. They're certainly leaving gaps, though, and I think that we might need to take a holistic look at this issue specifically.
Right, and following up in a similar vein, folks are wondering, how does the Families First Coronavirus Response Act address food needs? And so walk us through some of the benefits there. I know you've touched on some things already, but how does that help us as a country get through this as a relief package?
Yeah, certainly. Lots of different ways. One is that families are able to apply for the maximum amount of SNAP benefits per month if they're not already receiving them during the length of the pandemic. So that's one good thing. States are able to apply to allow WIC beneficiaries to substitute for foods that are not available. So imagine you have a WIC approved bread and one that's not WIC approved. If the WIC approved bread is not there, then the customers would be able to substitute with a non-WIC approved bread. Seems very sensible to me. States on a state by state basis are able to ask USDA to remove that restriction. Also on a state by state basis, you're seeing states. They're able to ask USDA to declare essentially a statewide emergency which would remove a lot of the red tape that families encounter when they go to food banks. Essentially just makes it a lot easier for families to get food from food banks. Again, states are able to apply for those to reduce those restrictions from USDA. One strong critique, and I think that this makes a lot of sense, one critique that I'm hearing is that states have to apply for these, and then USDA has to respond, and in many cases that takes weeks. So, for example, in the case of Pennsylvania was able to declare that, to use that disaster declaration to remove some of that red tape. I understand, though, that took 3 full weeks for Pennsylvania to get that. So imagine for some families that it's they have to wait those entire 3 weeks to be able to have access eased to food banks.
That's so alarming. Hopefully we can work faster as a country to get that. And I think, having people continue to discuss it is an important thing. I know we're here to talk about food security, but I've got various questions asking about a different kind of shelf in a grocery store, which is paper towels and toilet paper. And, are we seeing anything from the work you're observing of us safe and secure when it comes to making sure we have enough of that on hand?
I am buying food products, but I don't know. But I would advise that especially paper towel usage, that paper towels can be substituted with other things. I don't know. I think this could be a time for us to limit our usage of paper towels when we can substitute usage with something else.
Well, I think that comes back to something we were talking about earlier, where, if anything, we were looking at food waste earlier. This is an opportunity to curb behavior and really change it. And so maybe this is some great moment for some soul searching for those purchasing. Just a few more questions, and then we will let you go, Caitlin, I promise. But somebody else asking, in your role with CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, do you get to interface with experts like yourself throughout the world And if so, what are your colleagues who are also working on food security issues? What are they reporting about their own circumstances? So if we can think of the United States and how we're doing and how we're networked with other countries or we're talking to them, what does this look like globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't been in the job long enough to be able to have those conversations, but I will say that in addition to the public event that we're hosting in a couple of weeks on the potential for a global food price crisis, we're also hosting a private event in about a week to talk to experts about food insecurity in our own country, about what they're seeing, how they're responding, and what they need to respond better. So look forward to learning more, at least on the domestic front next week.
So one of the things we let in with, and this is my next to last question, one of the things we let in with, we told people that you had worked across multiple summits, not just the Jefferson's Global Summit, but the G7 and the G20s. What do you think the tone of conversations are going to be like around global food security at the next summits when we can gather together in person to have those discussions? What do you think the tone is going to be like there?
That's an interesting question. I think that certainly whether they're gathering virtually or in person, it's all going to be around the coronavirus pandemic. I honestly don't know if food insecurity will rise to leader level attention. I do want to say though that during the last food price crisis 12 years ago, it was on the agenda both of the G7 and the G20, particularly the G7. They came together and together as those countries pledged over $22 billion globally to food insecurity. So it'd be nice to see something like that again this year.
So, Caitlin, my final question, of course, we're here talking to you, the Director of Global Food Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS in Washington, D.C. For those looking to get more information and to follow up, perhaps we didn't get a chance to get to their question, or they thought of a question afterwards, or they're still viewing this video, where are good places to get information, including the CSIS website and other places that you would direct us to make sure we're getting accurate information in real time and know how to keep up with this crisis as we continue to do our part as individuals and as communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have launched a COVID-19 page in the Global Food Security Program's website at CSIS, and we're answering questions just as circumstances necessitate. So, for example, today we're having a conversation about foods that are WIC and SNAP eligible. So we're going to be asking the question, what are the foods that are eligible there? And we'll be listing those out on our webpage for people who might want to avoid purchasing those foods at grocery stores. Apart from our own, I think good resources there. One place that is constantly high quality is the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI. They have a good COVID-19 page, and they're dealing with issues around the world. But for international issues, I recommend going there.
So Caitlin Welsh, Erie native, so well accomplished, now the Director of Global Food Securities Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Big thanks to you for joining us for this conversation to talk about food security amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, talking from global agricultural trade to protecting the vulnerable in our communities to best practices, what we can do at the grocery store and when we get home. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. Folks at home, thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you again at the next Jefferson program. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, man.